Hey everyone, Nick from Accounting Add-ons here, and in this video we'll go through the DataDear Xero replacement template we created with OdataLink. This template provides access to your Xero data in the more common report formats of DataDear, being the profit and loss, balance sheet, and trial balance reports. Now in this video, we'll show you how to configure OdataLink to provide the data. We'll show you how to link the template to your own OdataLink account. We'll show you how to actually refresh the reports, and finally how to actually integrate the new template with your existing reports. Now let's get into it. Now I'll first start off to show you what the template looks like. The first sheet is the input sheet, which has the different parameters you can enter to drive the report. The start date and end date parameters controls how much data the reports will download. The other sheets in the workbook are a profit and loss report that lists your chart of accounts down the page and months across the page, a P&L tracking category report which provides a data set or a data dump of all the P&L transaction broken down by your tracking categories, a balance sheet report similar to the first profit and loss report with accounts down the page and months across, and again a trial balance report in a very similar layout, accounts on the page and month across. Now, one of the advantages of using OdataLink is that it's a live link to your data in Xero that can be used directly from within Excel or Power BI. You don't need to download and install any software for it to work. In fact, the template can be used from any location, whether it's the desktop or on the cloud. If we go to the Data tab in Excel and choose Queries and Connections, we can actually see a whole bunch of Power Queries that make up this workbook. Now, if we right-click on one of these queries and choose Edit Query, we will be brought to Power Query that has all the different instructions and steps to actually download the data. If we look at the source, that URL that you see up there, highlighted in red, is the actual link to your Xero data, in this case our sample demo company file. And it's the only thing that needs to be changed for this template to work with your data. Now we'll cover that a bit later in the video on how to change it very easily. The one thing to remember is that all these Power Queries are made up of multiple steps, and it's fully available and customizable from within Power Query. So it's not proprietary, it's not locked behind the scenes, it's possible for you to customize and tweak as you see fit. Now granted, the template will work outright, but if you need to make slight modifications, it's possible. Configuring OdataLink will be very straightforward. When you set up your trial, you'll be prompted to create a model, and the main choices you've got to make is against the data file type, you'll choose Xero Accounting. Against the login type, you can leave it as anonymous. The archive type can be set to live, and the other options can be left as the default for now. And I'll create model. I'll next need to add my Xero data file if it's not already there. So I'll click the Assign Data File, add Xero, and log in. I'll allow access to my data. I'll select the data file and add it to the list. The next step is to allow the endpoints. I'll click Manage Endpoints. And in this screen, I recommend you select all endpoints. And that'll give me access to everything. I'll then scroll to the bottom and click Save. And I've configured OdataLink. Now relinking the template to our OdataLink account is very straightforward. At the very end of this model page, we'll see our OData feeds. And this is where we can actually copy the URL of our OdataLink. We can jump to the template. We can go to the Data tab, Get Data, and choose Data Source Settings. This will bring up a list of all the data source settings, and we simply need to relink the data.odatalink.com one. So we'll select that, we'll choose Change Source, we'll paste our new URL in, and we'll click OK. And that's it, we've relinked the template to our own data. And to use the reports and to refresh them is very straightforward. we can go to the input sheet, and in this sheet we can choose what the start date and end date parameters for the data that we want. So I could actually go 1st of January 2022 to 31st of December 2022. I can also choose the tracking categories if I want to use the P&L tracking category report. In this case, we just have to enter the data file name that matches our account. So if I go back to OdataLink and go data files, it needs to match this name here, which I can copy. And I can paste that in here. I can then enter the name of my tracking categories as tracking category 1 and tracking category 2. In my case, it's region and test 2. Now to refresh the reports, I can go to the data tab in Excel, choose refresh all, or click on that big refresh button. I may be prompted to choose how to log in, and in this case I'll use anonymous access, which matches how I configured my OdataLink model. Now the only thing I'll do, because I've got multiple development accounts, I'll just make sure that it only applies to this video account here for this data file, and I'll choose connect. Now this will get OdataLink, or this will get Excel connecting to OdataLink to download all my Xero data directly into the spreadsheet. Once it's finished refreshing, I can actually look at my P&L report, and I can actually see I've got my data from January to December pulled across. I can have a look at the balance sheet. I've got the same data and trial balance. And it's that simple to actually refresh it and choose the inputs to drive the report. So we've got the template connected with our data and refreshing correctly. The next step is to grab this template and integrate it with our existing reports. Now I've got a dummy report here that I've created, which has a simple profit and loss sheet and a balance sheet. The profit and loss is using a pivot table to pull the data, so I'll show you how to actually relink that when you're using a pivot table. The balance sheet instead has VLOOKUP formulas that look up from the balance sheet report, so I'll show you that technique as well. I'll start with the VLOOKUP, or the balance sheet report. Now when wanting to add the data source coming from OdataLink instead of DataDear, the best approach is to actually pull your existing workbook sheets into the template. And that's because the DataDear template we created has a whole bunch of power queries, and to actually do it the other way around creates all kinds of nightmare and duplicate queries. So what we'll do, we'll go to our example report, and I'll grab this DD balance sheet. I'll move or copy. I'll choose my DataDear template, and I'll move it to the end. So what I'm doing is I'm just pulling that sheet into my template that has the automation. I'll then go back to my example report, and I'll pull the actual balance sheet report itself. So I'll move or copy, and I'll move it right before the DD balance sheet. Now once I've done that, I'll highlight all the balance sheet rows, and I'll delete them. I'll then go to my balance sheet template, I'll cut it out of this sheet, and I'll paste it over this one. Now this works for this specific type of report because my balance sheet was using VLOOKUP formulas that was looking at a specific sheet and specific cells. To move my profit and loss is slightly different. I've got a profit and loss sheet that's got getPivot function, which points to the P&L pivot sheet, which points to my data source. So I'll actually have to move the data source first, then the P&L pivot, then the profit and loss. So I'll start off move or copy, and I'll move my DataDear P&L to the end. I'll then move the P&L pivot just in front of the D&L P&L, and then I'll move my profit and loss. The first thing I'll need to do is identify which sheet I want to replace, and this format here is closest to this P&L tracking category, which has reporting name, descriptions, and a whole bunch of columns across the page. So one thing about this sheet was that there were formulas on the far right that I'll have to copy into my P&L tracking report. So I'll highlight these two cells, click copy, I'll go to P&L tracking, I'll scroll to the top and to the right, and I'll just paste those formulas here. And I'll make sure they're relinked correctly. Now at the moment you can see it says square bracket P&L, I'll remove that just to make sure it points to its own table. This one here has all kinds of formulas that need to be cleaned up, so I just need to relink it correctly away from the P&L sheet and into the sheet that it's on itself. Once I've done that, my formulas are copied across. Now I want to do that before I relink the pivot table. So I'll move this sheet towards the far end here. And what I can then do is I won't need this sheet once I've relinked it. So I'll go to P&L, I'll go pivot table analyze, change source, and I'll relink it to my P&L tracking sheet. I'll highlight all the rows and I'll click OK. And I've relinked this P&L to this sheet now, which means I don't technically need this DD P&L sheet. I'll delete it. Now this sheet has been relinked. So what I'll need to do now is double check that the profit and loss sheet is still working correctly. And you can actually see it's working fine. I don't have any errors in my formulas. I don't have any hash names. This sheet is pulling from the get pivot data of the P&L pivot, and the P&L pivot is linked to my data set coming from OdataLink. And that's it to actually relink the reports. And the last step is you can actually delete any table you're not interested in. So we've got our P&L tracking working, we've got our balance sheet working, we don't need the P&L, the balance sheet, and the trial balance. So I'll highlight those three sheets and I'll delete them out of the template. Now that brings us to the end of the video. I hope you found this interesting and useful. As always, if you have any questions or any difficulties, feel free to jump on our website and go to the chat and we'll be able to answer your questions. Take care.